Today, we're uncovering some of the most shocking police corruption cover-ups in history. Imagine living in a world where those sworn to protect you are the very ones committing heinous crimes. This is the reality for many, and today we start with the Rampart Scandal in Los Angeles. But stay tuned, because later we'll reveal how these scandals are still impacting communities today. In the late 1990s, the Rampart division of the LAPD was rocked by a scandal that exposed widespread corruption. More than 70 officers were implicated in misconduct, including unprovoked beatings, shootings, planting evidence, and even dealing drugs. This elite unit, known as Crash, was initially formed to combat gang violence, but soon became a gang itself. And what happened to the officers involved? We'll get to that shortly. Take the case of Juan Saldana, a 21-year-old man who was shot by police and left bleeding to death in the hallway of a shabby mid-city apartment building. According to disgraced former officer Rafael Perez, LAPD officers intentionally delayed calling an ambulance while they planted a gun near where Saldana had fallen and concocted an elaborate story to justify the shooting. But this is just the beginning of the shocking revelations. Perez, who later cooperated with investigators, revealed that the 1996 shooting of Juan Saldana was one of 3 incidents where he or fellow Crash officers unjustly wounded or killed suspects. On that fateful day, Perez was running down the hallway of an apartment building at 676 South Chateau Place when he heard Officer Kulin Patel shoot. Saldana was hit in the chest, and Perez, just a few steps behind, reached him in seconds. He knew there was no gun near Saldana. Perez described how fellow Rampart Crash officers Brian Hewitt and Doyle Stepp appeared at the bottom of the stairs where Saldana had fallen. They looked down at the fatally wounded Saldana, and one of them said,
"Oh shit, we got him."
The officers then ran back upstairs and returned with a gun, which they placed next to Saldana to justify the shooting. Perez alleged that Hewitt and Stepp later claimed that Saldana had dropped the gun while they were chasing him. As the officers stood nearby and got their stories straight, Saldana's condition steadily deteriorated. He collapsed at the door of the apartment building and died a short time later at County USC Medical Center. An autopsy revealed that he had suffered 2 fatal gunshot wounds, one in the chest and one in the back. Perez told investigators that he suspected Saldana had dropped his gun before Stepp and Hewitt shot him, but he had no proof. He recalled joking with Stepp and Hewitt about how many rounds they had fired, indicating a disturbing level of casualness about the incident. Perez also revealed that after the shooting, the officers celebrated at a local bar, talking in riddles and making innuendos about what had happened. This was the standard practice after a shooting, highlighting the deeply ingrained culture of corruption within the Rampart Crash unit. What do you think about the Rampart scandal? Comment your thoughts down below. And don't go anywhere, because next we'll dive into the story of Frank Serpico, a man who risked everything to expose corruption within the NYPD. In a world where power is unchecked, where authority silences dissent and justice turns a blind eye, who holds them accountable? This is Corruption Chronicles, where we pull back the curtain on police corruption, abuse of power, and the lives shattered in its wake. Next, we turn to the story of Frank Serpico, a man who risked everything to expose corruption within the New York Police Department. But what happened to Serpico after he blew the whistle? Stay tuned to find out. In the turbulent era of the late 1960s and early 1970s, as New York City grappled with social upheaval and urban challenges, one man stood against the tide of corruption within the police department. Frank Serpico, a former NYPD detective, became a symbol of unwavering integrity as he blew the whistle on systemic corruption that had permeated the city's police force. His courageous testimony in 1971 became the focal point of hearings that triggered the most significant shakeup in the history of the New York City Police Department. But the story doesn't end there. Frank Serpico was born in Brooklyn in 1936, growing up in a working-class Italian-American family. He joined the NYPD in 1959 with a deep-seated commitment to serve and protect his community. Serpico quickly gained a reputation as a dedicated and principled officer, earning several commendations for his outstanding police work. But what drove him to take such a dangerous stand against corruption? We'll explore that next. As Serpico ascended the ranks, he became increasingly aware of a dark underbelly within the police force. Corruption, bribery, and unethical unethical practices were not isolated incidents, but rather systemic issues that had taken root. Serpico witnessed fellow officers accepting bribes, engaging in illegal activities, and compromising the very ideals they were sworn to uphold. Rather than succumbing to the pressures of the prevailing culture, Serpico chose to confront the corruption head-on. He reported his concerns to supervisors, expecting internal affairs investigations to address the issues. However, the response was lackluster, and he faced ostracism from within the department. In 1970, Frank Serpico took a momentous step by approaching the New York Times with his revelations about widespread corruption within the NYPD. His decision to become a whistleblower was not without personal risk. Serpico knew that exposing the truth could lead to retaliation from his fellow officers. The ensuing article, published on April 25, 1970, exposed a pervasive culture of corruption, detailing instances of payoffs, shakedowns, and an ingrained code of silence within the NYPD. Serpico's testimony became a rallying point for those advocating for accountability and reform within law enforcement. In response to Serpico's revelations, the city established the Knapp Commission to investigate police corruption. Frank Serpico played a central role in the commission's hearings, testifying about the extent of corruption and the challenges he faced when attempting to expose it. His gripping accounts provided a damning indictment of the NYPD's internal culture. The Knapp Commission's findings, fueled by Serpico's testimony, led to a seismic shakeup within the NYPD. The exposure of corruption resulted in the dismissal of numerous officers, changes in departmental policies, and increased oversight to prevent further misconduct. Frank Serpico's courageous stand against corruption had a lasting impact on law enforcement practices, not only in New York City but also across the nation. Serpico's decision to blow the whistle came at a significant personal cost. In 1971, he was shot in the face during a drug raid that many believed was an intentional act of retaliation. Despite surviving the shooting, Serpico faced a long and challenging road to recovery. Following his recovery, Serpico left the NYPD and lived abroad for several years, distancing himself from the spotlight. Over time, his story became synonymous with the fight against corruption and the courage it takes to challenge institutional wrongdoing. Frank Serpico's courageous whistleblowing efforts in the late 1960s and 1970s left an indelible mark on the history of law enforcement. His testimony was a catalyst for significant reforms within the NYPD and prompted a broader conversation about police accountability and ethical conduct. Serpico's unwavering commitment to truth and justice serves as an enduring inspiration for those who seek to expose corruption and uphold the principles of integrity within society. What are your thoughts on Frank Serpico's story? Comment down below. Because truth is a weapon more powerful than any badge. Together we uncover the stories they don't want you to hear and fight for accountability, one truth at a time. If you stand for accountability and justice, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can shine a light on the truth and ensure no abuse goes unchallenged.